Awesome. Hello, empty room. That's okay. I don't really expect anybody to show up to this. I'm just testing out live streaming. I don't know. I don't know how to get the backdrop to just be my haunted radio show drawing. So this is what we're working with. Just me in front of the laptop with my microphone. Hopefully people can hear me. I'm just doing this, like I said, to test out the live stream function, and then I really kind of fucked up my fourth episode of the haunted radio show. So I'm gonna just kind of recap it here in this live stream. If people show up, that's cool. If they don't, also cool. Nobody showed up to the fourth episode because it got canceled. And nobody showed because I record them. Nobody shows up to them. It's just me in front of the mic. I'd like to get guests on. I've got a few friends who are really into movies. I've got a lot of people I know that are really into horror movies. So there's plenty of people I'd like to get a chance to talk to. It just hasn't really been in the cards yet. Maybe if we can get this channel kind of bumping, we could. So anyway, in that episode that I tried to take it off of YouTube. I don't think it worked. I just made the video private. I couldn't see any button to just delete the video, which I know exists because people do it all the time. I just couldn't find it. I didn't look very hard, but it seemed less important to delete it and more important to just make sure people couldn't actually click on it, because it was like 25 minutes and the audio stopped working in the first 10 seconds. And I didn't know because I was recording. So I don't really have much of a editing phase. I usually just listen to the first couple of seconds to make sure that my voice was captured. And now I have to kind of scroll through a lot more of the video before I post it. So I didn't really know. I don't really edit these things. And then I just posted it, and lo and behold, you couldn't hear anything. So I got rid of that. So if you look at the podcast episodes, tomorrow, being a Wednesday, there's a new episode. It's labeled number 5. It's the fourth one that you're going to see, but I'm sticking with the numbers. It's my channel. All right, so what I did on that episode was compare the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre to the remake. So that's what I'm going to do here. I'm just comparing the two. I saw some Twitter poll ask which version people preferred, and it was the majority. It was, the last time I checked, it was 70% of people prefer the original, 30% of people prefer the remake. I'm one of those 30% people. I thought the remake just did the story a lot better. I can understand sort of the cultural significance in terms of film history that the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre holds. But to me, you can respect something for what it did and still, have an opinion about it. Interestingly, scrolling through that Twitter feed, there was a lot of obviously the original is a classic, but I find myself watching the remake a lot more. I also find myself watching the remake a lot more, and that's because it's a lot better. It just handled the concept a lot better. So I'm going to kind of go into some details regarding the original and regarding the remake and how they kind of, on a technical level, stack up, and then I'm going to go into more detail about my thoughts about what was better in the remake. Obviously, I like the remake more. So in 1974, all right, so this is something I should have checked in the 2 days that I've had. Is it Toby Hooper or is it Tobe Hooper? I'm going to say Toby because that sounds more like a real name. But, if anybody wants to correct me, that would be helpful because I really don't know. I don't know how to pronounce that. I'm going to call him Mr. Hooper for this video. So Mr. Hooper was the director. The budget was somewhere between 80 and 140,000. I'm going to assume that has to do with like marketing or something. I know production, there's a different number and then there's the actual final thing. So I'm gonna say it was 80,000 because it sounds more impressive to say it was a lot less. And also that seems to be a little more in the ballpark of the kind of consistent numbers I see. I see 80 to 90 $1,000 more often than I see 140. Once again, correct me if I'm wrong. But it made $30.9 million out of the box office, so that's an undisputable hit. Starred Marilyn Burns as Sally, Gunnar Hansen as Leatherface. Sally is our final girl. She gets tortured a whole lot. It's kind of hard to watch. And then the only other cast member I feel like bringing up is the dude who plays Sally's brother, Franklin. His name was Paul A. Partain. Super annoying. Most annoying character in the movie. Couldn't wait for him to die. And it took way too long for him to die. That's something in the remake. I just like all the characters. There's no one I'm just like rooting for to die. I kind of just like everybody. The original, I don't feel that way. So that's one thing. Moving on, the original was shot in a very grainy, almost documentary kind of style, and that plus the fact it was advertised as being a true story, it kind of creates this sort of sensation of like you're watching something that really happened. It's very real. It's very gritty, and to that effect, it's terrifying in a way because it really feels so real that even though there's not a lot of blood, in fact, there's very little like gore in the movie. It feels so close to home in the sense that it feels so much like reality that it doesn't matter that you're not seeing a lot of blood. You don't see a lot of blood when you watch like car accidents happen, but they really strike a nerve because it's real. The original movie had that going for it. But that being said, if you go into something that's kind of hyped up as like people thought it was real or people think it's real, it almost kind of sets you up for disappointment. That's how I felt with the Blair Witch Project. That was something I'd heard about for years before I saw it, and I knew that it was something that people were on the fence when it came out. Like, did we actually watch a real found footage movie, or did it just kind of feel like that? That just should have been assigned to me before I saw it, that not a lot is going to happen on camera, because if it's kind of tricking people into thinking that it's real, it's not going to capture a whole lot. Texas Chainsaw Massacre, I don't know if anybody necessarily thought it was real, but it does have that sort of aesthetic of this is a real thing. I mean, I don't know what else to really say about it. The last half hour is just an assault on the senses, which I understand is terrifying, or at least that's what they're going for. But it just gets so old so fast, and after a few minutes, I just didn't really want to hear all that screaming and just watch all this weird torture going on. Just it's another thing. It's a stylistic choice. I get what they're doing. They're kind of forcing you to go through what Sally is going through at that dinner table. Uh, to an extent, they do that in the remake, but I think it's done. It's just handled better, and it's kind of over quicker, and they move on to other things. So that's something that I appreciate about the remake, and it's something I appreciate about the original, but it's not my cup of tea, and I'm fine admitting that. So we're moving on to the remake. This was released in 2003, directed by Marcus Nispel, who also directed the Friday the 13th reboot, which I just recorded a podcast about that, and that's what's going on. That's what's going up tomorrow. That's a pretty good movie. I like this one a lot more. I would honestly say the Texas Chainsaw Massacre reboot, the remake, is probably my favorite slasher movie. It's got a lot of ideas that I think would make a great slasher movie in there, and I think it's executed really well. Hooper was a co-producer on this movie, so it wasn't Nightmare on Elm Street, I know, was made without any involvement from Wes Craven. That's you know, you kind of want to get somebody's input on that if you're messing around with their baby, you know. This movie benefits from R. Lee Ermey as Sheriff Hoyt. Phenomenal character. I would say the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise has a history that, I mean, you look at Friday the 13th, it's kind of the same movie over and over. But with Texas Chainsaw Massacre, it's like the same movie over and over, but they keep switching out who Leatherface is hanging out with, who his family is. Leatherface is the only consistent character, and even he's kind of handled inconsistently. So this is my favorite iteration of his family, and that's thanks in no small part to R. Lee Ermey as Sheriff Hoyt. Absolutely killed it. He was a despicable character, a vile villain, if you will. Just the kind of guy that you love to hate. Kind of like Heath Ledger's Joker, like a really just sick, twisted guy. But he's played with this kind of confidence and charisma that you enjoy watching him. Andrew Briniarski, I don't know how to say his last name. Dude played Leatherface. He was like 250 pounds, 230 maybe, as himself. And then they put him in a fat suit. He's got all this makeup on. He ended up being like 300 pounds, maybe over, playing Leatherface. Once again, this is something I bring up in my podcast about Friday the 13th reboot. All of these horror movie remakes do such a good job of making really intimidating villains. I think that's the only thing the Nightmare on Elm Street movie remake has going for it. Was Jackie Earle Haley as Freddy Krueger was very creepy and intimidating. Rob Zombie's Halloween, same thing. One of the only things it's got going for it is Tyler Mane as Michael Myers. Very intimidating. Just a brutal killer. big guys. Same thing with Derek Mears as Jason Voorhees in the remake. Good stuff. Just big, intimidating villains. So that's another thing I think the remake has over the original. The remake was produced on a budget of $9.5 million, so it's a much sleeker production. It's much more graphic in its violence. There's a lot more gore. It's very obviously a Hollywood-produced film. And to me, I'm seeing a movie. I expect it to look like a movie. That didn't bother me at all. Not having that very realistic style. I think having that style might have hurt this movie. That's one of those things. I would be interested in seeing more of that technique used in some of these movies. Having it, because you don't need to be spending all this money on a slasher movie. It can look very gritty and very homemade and still be really good. But that it's not so much that that's a plus for me as that it's just not a minus. It's not a negative on the movie that it looks the way it does. It's just a fact. It doesn't bother me. Looking at all the teen characters, like I said, there's no one that I despise. I like them. Jessica Biel, as I said, plays the final girl. Her name is Erin. I didn't write down anybody else's characters or names. I just remember that her boyfriend, they had a pretty cute relationship from what I can remember. And I know that he was going to propose to her and he never got the chance. And actually, when Leatherface has him kind of like hung upside down, the ring falls out of his pocket. That sort of thing, it just sort of adds another layer to these characters. It doesn't necessarily make them these crazy three-dimensional characters that I'm going to really remember their names for, because clearly I didn't. But it adds a little aspect of you don't want to see them die because they've got this good relationship going and you want them to be able to see it through. That's and it kind of it bugs you a little bit that they don't get to see it. It adds a little bit more depth to the violence, and when Leatherface is killing these people, you don't immediately want him to kill these people. That's one issue I took with obviously the original, but then the Friday the 13th remake. A lot of those characters were just really shitty, and I wanted them to die. In Texas Chainsaw Massacre, I didn't feel that way. I wanted them to get through it, and that added a little layer of depth to the kills and the violence that I don't think was communicated in the original, and certainly not in a lot of slasher movies. So that's something that I think the remake did really well, and I'd like to see it in more movies, but we just haven't. There's another great scene also involving the boyfriend where Leatherface makes another mask and he makes it out of the boyfriend's face. This is something that I don't think I've seen in any of the other Texas Chainsaw Massacre movies. Maybe I have, and I'm just not remembering it. But I remember it being very memorable in this movie because I liked those characters more. And there's this great shot where he turns around and Erin sees him, and she sees that he's wearing her boyfriend's face. And that was a very cool scene in this movie, and it's something that I really wish was done more with these movies. I think that's something that you get to do with Leatherface, and only with Leatherface, but you don't. Nobody's really taken advantage of it before, so it's very cool to see that in this movie. And that about rounds it out. Those are my reasons for liking the remake. Those are my reasons for liking it more than the original. Like I said, this was a live stream test. Not expecting a huge audience. This is just going to go into the archives. It's going to go on my channel. You can check it out anytime. This is basically what the Haunted Radio Show episode 4 was. It didn't have a chance to actually be produced. So with that, I'm signing out. I'm going to see how this went. I really hope I had the mic on the whole time. I can see it's picking up sound, so we're good. Yeah, so just a live stream test. I'll do more of these once I have an actual following that will show up to these things and make it worth doing a live stream as opposed to a podcast. But I wanted to make sure I know what I'm doing. All right, because the last time I didn't know what I was doing, and when I went to go start it, YouTube told me I had to wait 24 hours to be authorized to live stream. So I waited 24 hours, I live streamed, I practiced, got the hang of it, I think. Let me know what you thought, and talk to you guys later. All right, peace out. Yeah, I want to end it. And now I'm going to look like an idiot.